Do you believe in little gray men and flying saucers? Well, if so, you're among 65% of Americans who believe that life probably exists on other planets. But across the pond in the United Kingdom, well, they have their own extraterrestrial problems. And an unlikely UFO hotspot was the site of not one, but two of the most baffling cases in British UFO history. They revolve around a mysterious death, a government cover-up, and a law enforcement officer who found himself thrust into the middle of both of them. This is extremely strange. Around 3:30 p.m. on June 6, 1980, retired miner and Polish immigrant Zygmunt Adamski, known to his many friends as Ziggy, left his wife Lottie at their home in Tingley, England, greeted a neighbor washing his car, and set out on foot into town to purchase some potatoes. He reached the shop, purchased the goods, had a brief exchange with the storekeeper, and headed home. Zygmunt, like many Poles, had fled their country after World War II to start a new life. Lottie had contracted multiple sclerosis and was by then confined to a wheelchair, and Ziggy needed to spend more time with her. His own health was failing as he had developed a lung deformity after years of working in the coal mines. He had petitioned the mine owners for an early retirement, but the request had been denied. When he didn't return home on this day, his wife obviously became quite concerned and phoned the authorities. He rarely was seen in the company of anyone but his closest friends and family, and it was totally out of character for him to just go off and disappear for hours. Despite an exhaustive search, the days passed with no sign of Zygmunt Adamski, leaving the increasingly alarmed Lottie to wonder if perhaps someone had kidnapped her husband. In a twist of tragic irony, 4 days after his disappearance, his denial for retirement was reversed. 1 day later, on July 11th, the son of a coal mine owner, Trevor Parker, arrived at the property and made a ghastly discovery. He saw the body of a man, later identified as Zygmunt Adamski, lying face down atop a 12-foot-high mound of anthracite that had been piled up in the yard. The coal mine was located in Todmorden, which was 20 miles away from where Adamski had initially been heading. Police constables Alan Godfrey and Mervyn Haig were the first to arrive at the scene, and climbing to where the man's body was located, noticed several things that stood out to them. The man was wearing a striped jacket, but his shirt was missing, as were the man's wallet and watch. His clothing was not properly fitted, as if he was dressed by someone else, but otherwise clean and free of any marks or soot that might have been picked up while scaling the pile. And for a man missing for 5 days, he appeared to be well shaven with no more than a day's worth of stubble on his face, and there were no imprints left on the coal that would suggest he had scaled the pile, nor any footprints leading up to it. It was almost as if Adamski's body had somehow been dropped there. The condition of the body was pristine, other than some mysterious burns on his head, neck, and shoulders that appeared to be covered in some type of gel or ointment. His hair seemed to have been cropped rather haphazardly. But the thing that most haunted Godfrey was the look on the man's face, which he described as one that was frozen in a look of absolute terror. Godfrey claimed, "Those eyes were staring up at me. I was looking down on him from a foot away. Those eyes sent a shudder down my spine. They were wide open. He had a look of someone who had seen something or someone that had scared him to death." Pathologist Alan Edwards' report stated the man had died between 11:15 a.m. and 1:15 p.m. on July 11th, the same day his body was discovered. Yet the burn marks on him were 2 days old, There were also superficial abrasions and cuts on one leg, hands, and knees. Cause of death was ruled a heart attack. Coroner James Turnbull went on to call this case the biggest mystery of his career. Now, strangely, Trevor Parker said he had been on the site from 8 a.m. to 11:15 a.m. and hadn't seen anything unusual, let alone a dead body on a coal pile. There appears to be no definitive reason as to where he was and how he got to where he was found, but there have been some interesting theories put forth. Let's get into them. Perhaps in suffering some cardiac distress, Adamski had wandered around in some sort of dissociative state for a few days, which might explain him climbing on a pile of coal. But again, the pile and the surrounding area was otherwise found undisturbed. Some say he may have been struck by ball lightning, which resulted in his heart stopping. But why was his shirt removed, and who had treated his burn marks with the gel-like substance found on them? An investigation revealed he had not been admitted to any local hospitals, and toxicology tests could not reveal what that substance was. Many have even laid blame on the KGB for his disappearance, as they were known to abduct and assassinate those who were deemed enemies of the state. But Adamski had lived in the UK for over 40 years and had never been involved in anything remotely worthy of being hunted down by an intelligence service. It's further been suggested that he may have been a victim of a family dispute, where a female member had secured a restraining order against her husband and was staying with the Adamskis. Perhaps in a fit of rage he had taken Zygmunt, holding him captive and torturing him until he succumbed to a heart attack. Still, the placement of the body seemed a bit melodramatic, and with the absence of footprints or drag marks around or in the pile, it just doesn't seem like a plausible explanation. Finally, we come to what has enthralled ufologists for decades: the possibility that Adamski was abducted and then dumped cattle mutilation style where his body was found. Now, before anyone dismisses this as just another crank claim, there are a few things to consider about the otherwise quaint and peaceful little town of Todmorden. 5 months after the discovery of Zygmunt Adamski's body, Todmorden found itself once again embroiled in a UFO controversy, and it all took place less than a mile from where Adamski's body was found. And the first respondent was none other than Alan Godfrey. One rainy night, Godfrey had received a call around 5:15 a.m. from dispatch concerning some cattle that had escaped their confines near a housing estate near Burnley Road. En route, he brought his Ford Escort patrol car to a dead stop when, in the middle of the road, he came upon what he thought at first might be a disabled bus, but soon realized it was a brilliantly lighted, diamond-shaped object hovering some 5 feet above the road. According to Godfrey, it was about 20 feet high and roughly 14 feet wide, and the lower half rotated in place, spinning leaves on the road in the opposite direction. Remaining inside the car, Godfrey turned on the emergency lights and attempted to call his sighting into dispatch, but despite multiple attempts, he received no response back. He then grabbed his clipboard and drew a sketch of the object. It was then that the object seemed to vanish in a bright flash, and Godfrey suddenly found himself driving his radio car 500 yards further down the road from where he had initially encountered the object. Taking note of the time, the officer realized it was now 25 minutes later than when he first observed the craft, although it seemed only a few minutes had passed. He also realized one of his boots had been split open, and he felt a pronounced itch in one of his feet. Baffled, Godfrey returned to where he had seen the light with another policeman, Malcolm Agley, and discovered the road where his car had been was completely dry, despite the rain that had been falling. Getting out to investigate the area, they saw scattered leaves and broken branches in the road, and when they entered an adjacent park to try to sight the object, They found the cows Godfrey had been looking for inside, standing in the middle of a rugby field. They had not been there before he saw the strange objects in the sky, and no hoof prints had been left in the wet, soft ground. It was almost as if they, like Zygmunt Adamski 5 months earlier, had simply been dropped there. Puzzled by what had happened to him and why he had experienced missing time, he sought answers and was convinced by UFO researcher Harry Harris to undergo regression hypnosis to relive those moments. Under hypnosis, Godfrey recalled that he had indeed exited his car, but upon returning to it, he was engulfed by a bright white light and lost consciousness. When he awoke, he was in a strange room being examined by 6 small creatures and a tall human-like figure sporting a beard. Now, Godfrey admits that after the encounter, he read a number of science fiction novels and wondered out loud if perhaps the images that he saw maybe mirrored what he had read in these books. But his remarkable experience with aliens was countered by the derision and mockery he received from humans. Godfrey would become the object of ridicule by his fellow officers. When he showed up the following night for his next shift, he was greeted with, "Hey, up, it's Captain Kirk." Making matters more complicated was the pressure put on law enforcement in Yorkshire in 1980 to apprehend Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, whose 5-year reign of terror had the entire region fearing for their safety. An officer reporting spacecraft and aliens would do nothing to positively impact their already tarnished public image. Despite their efforts, the story was leaked to the local newspaper, who filed it under the headline, "May the Force Be With You," at the time where the Star Wars saga was at its peak of popularity. When the story made national news, Allen stunningly received a letter from a Russian professor at Moscow University requesting more details of his experience, and another at a joint US-UK base near Suffolk called Rendlesham, which at that point Allen had never heard of. Because at the time the Cold War was raging, Allen chose to forward this letter to his superiors. One day he was summoned to the chief inspector's office, where he saw a man sitting there in civilian clothing who was introduced to him as the man from the ministry. The man held a file which, upon opening, contained Godfrey's sketch of the object as well as his report on Zygmunt Adamski. Citing something called the Official Secrets Act, Godfrey was ordered in the strongest terms not to speak with the press about the incident. From that point on, Allen felt he was being watched by this mysterious figure, often seeing him around and about while suspecting his phone had been tapped. Godfrey would eventually confront the man in a local pub, where he told him he was on to him and to stop following him. The man was not seen by Allen from that point on. Godfrey believes he was possibly an MI5 agent, while others thought him to be from the Yorkshire police. But either way, his presence was interpreted to be a form of intimidation to discourage Allen from speaking of the encounter any further. Godfrey felt certain the pressure exerted on him was designed to force him out of the department, and in 1984 he was offered early disability retirement based on a previous injury he had suffered on duty. He chose retirement, leaving with an exemplary record. From there, he found work as a butcher and a security specialist, but turned to alcohol to deal with the stigma he found attached to himself. His marriage deteriorated and ended in divorce in 1988. In the early 1990s, he became despondent and, with no money or place to stay, ended up sleeping at a friend's house. He could not afford presents for his children at Christmas and fell into a very dark place. Seemingly at the end of his rope, he admonished himself for his self-pity, gathered himself, found his own place, and eventually met his second wife, Kathleen, who helped him get back on his feet. Now happily married with 3 grandchildren, he has embraced the pseudo-celebrity status he attained and drives a car with UFO on the license plate. The mystery and cover-up to his encounter included the sketch pad that he used to draw the object on, which had mysteriously disappeared from police records. And in 2014, when the Ministry of Defense released their UFO reports to the National Archives, no record of Godfrey's encounter was in there. But as time went on, Godfrey's claim took a quantum leap into the realm of believable based on some reports that came out years afterwards. It was discovered merely an hour before Allen's encounter that 5 Halifax policemen, including John Porter, were out searching for a stolen motorbike in Moreland Quarry when they saw a bright blue light sweeping across the sky. Porter estimated it moved at least 12 miles in a split second. He saw it again just up the road heading toward Todmorden before it vanished from sight. And on the same night as his sighting, a school caretaker named Leonard Smith was checking the grounds when he turned a corner and, looking to the sky, saw an unidentified object at exactly the spot where Allen Godfrey was having his own encounter. He watched the object shoot across a valley 4 times, forward and backward, until it finally disappeared over a hill. And then 1 year after Godfrey's experience, Todmorden resident Vicky Dinsdale, along with her grandfather, were out walking her dog when they sighted a long, thin, diamond-shaped object that continuously changed colors sequentially from white to blue to green to red. Her grandfather, a former sergeant in the British Army, keenly aware of the ridicule endured by Allen Godfrey, advised his granddaughter to not disclose what they had seen. From that point on, anomalous aerial sightings became something of the norm for the residents of Todmorden. 1989. At the Deer Play Inn located above the moors of Todmorden, landlady Val Pilling claims her husband came into their bedroom while she was asleep one night and woke her to come take a look at something in the sky. Val went down to the lounge and saw a strange light behind a nearby cottage moving toward the moors at an estimated 50 miles per hour, lighting up a car park, in her words, as if it were daylight before it finally moved off. 1993. At around 7 p.m. one August, 3 women, Joanne Elledge, Sarah Wolfenden, and Amy Connolly, were out one night with some friends when one of them called the others to come watch an unusual object that seemed to hover above and behind them for about 10 minutes. They described it as saucer-shaped with red and green lights on the bottom, and most disturbingly, it was completely silent, with no sound of a propulsive mechanism. Since those events, Todmorden now has an observatory where telescopes are now trained on the skies above. Astronomer Peter Drew and 2 colleagues were at the telescope one night when they all saw a saucer-shaped object moving through the heavens above Todmorden. Todmorden and surrounding areas of West Yorkshire have morphed into UFO hotspots, with over 40 years of reports over the Pennines mountain range, in the skies over Rothwell, and most recently, strange lights in the sky hovering over the Ribblehead Viaduct for hours on end that were witnessed by 2 21-year-old young men. Todmorden also has long had what one might term a supernatural history, with tales of witches and ghosts, or vampires at Robin Hood's grave, to monolithic druid stones on its moors, and a 16th century priest widely considered to be a ghostbuster. It's also been said that geology may play a role in the bizarre occurrences there, with numerous bodies of water and rich quartz deposits, which may combine to fuel paranormal activity. It has also embraced its place in the UFO pantheon, with monthly UFO meetings held upstairs at the Golden Lion. There are also numerous reports of cattle mutilations taking place in Todmorden that reveal the common themes of such events: cuts made with surgical precision, no sign of blood splatter or a general draining of blood, with genitalia, ears, eyes, and other soft tissue organs being removed. Now, it has to be noted that Todmorden is in the flight path of two major airports, Heathrow and Manchester, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that a commercial aircraft could be mistaken for something non-terrestrial. John Porter, for one, dismisses any idea of commercial aircraft being responsible for what he saw, and he went so far as to contact the military and the Civil Air Patrol in Britain, who both claimed they had nothing in the air that night. And in a weird twist, because of the injuries suffered by Alan Godfrey prior to his encounter, he was told he would never be able to sire children again. But oddly, after the encounter, he fathered a son. And now the little town of Todmorden mirrors many other UFO hotspots around the world. And the residents now keep an eye to the sky, waiting for the next unusual encounter.